Hello and welcome to the Wildlife Moto channel. Today's video is a quick update on the BMW R100CS build, and I want to start with a quick apologies for the appalling editing in this video. I've actually done my shoulder in somehow. I think it might be RSI or something, but this shoulder is actually killing me. And I'm a lefty, so this is my editing hand. So I'm normally like on the mouse editing. But I'm going to just have to keep this one basic because it hurts. Oh, poor me. Anyway, so little warning there. Right, so the bike is coming along really well now. We're starting to get to the point where I'm going to be able to start reassembling the machine properly. As you probably heard in previous videos, the entire bike was pulled apart. Everything has been done on this machine. Engine stripped down to the crank, gearbox, all the paint, all the powder coating, all the bearings, all the seals, electrics, everything has been completely overhauled. It has meant sending little bits and pieces off to different companies who specialize in certain things like chroming, powder coating, engine building, gearbox restoration, suspension work, and slowly but surely things are now starting to kind of come back. The big benchmark that we hit recently was getting the engine back into the frame. So that's now done. So the engine is currently all rebuilt. We've had some problems to overcome. We had issues with the Nickel plating on the cylinders being worn out, one of the pistons being slightly out of round. Elsewhere, just, a case of new valve seats, new valves, decoking, vapor blasting, everything from the cases to the heads and all that kind of stuff. So it's taken a long time. It's taken much longer than I anticipated. But progress is being made. We're nearly at that point, as I said, where we can start rebuilding properly. And along that journey, as I've talked about in previous videos, I have decided to do a few little performance-focused modifications that I can now talk about in some more detail. So, for example, rear suspension. I'm going to be decommissioning the Koni Icon dial-a-ride shocks that were on the bike when I got it. Now, these aren't the original BMW shocks, but they are probably pretty old. I think they stopped making these shocks around 2000 when a company called Icon picked up the tooling and then started creating a version of these shocks, which I think for all intents and purposes are extremely similar. But mine are the original Koni brand. So that means they're at least around 20 years old and possibly were put on the bike quite early days. So they could be pushing on for 40 years old or so. So I think it's time for these shocks to take a bit of a rest now. And they're off the bike. And they've been replaced by these. These are a set of shocks from a company called Hagen here in the UK. And I've got to say, if you're a British rider, I don't know what it's like elsewhere out in other markets, but these shocks represent incredible value for money. I think it's partly because they're made over here, so you don't have to deal with like import duties and taxes and all that kind of stuff, but also the fact that you can buy them directly from Hagen, so you're cutting out the kind of margins from the middle men or the distributors and all that kind of stuff. So in terms of value for money, I think these are exceptional. Absolutely fantastic. Now, the Nitro shocks that I've gone for sit kind of at the higher end of the Hagen range. There is one step up, you can get the piggyback shocks, but I just didn't think they would really suit this bike. These are the stainless steel gas-charged Nitro shocks, as they call them. And I think they look absolutely incredible. Everything you see here is stainless steel, apart from the little mounting points at the top and the bottom, which are anodized aluminium. And I've opted to keep everything raw metal. So the spring is just stainless, as is the shock body. And I think it's a real celebration of stainless steel. So I didn't want to powder coat that spring as you would normally expect to find on this bike. So I think it's going to look really cool. Anyways, there's some benefits of having nitrogen charged shocks, benefits that I'm pretty sure that I won't realize the full extent of with the type of riding that I do on the road, but it is just good to know that you've got that functionality in these shocks. Typically speaking, there are two types of shocks really. There's cheaper emulsion shocks, which use a mix of hydraulic fluid and a gas inside the shock absorber to provide the right levels of damping. So as the piston kind of rams through the air and oil mix, you get a damping effect. But over time on a ride, you can experience what's known as shock fade, which is where that fluid and that air starts to foam up. It starts to get hotter, it starts to lose its viscosity. And as more air kind of bubbles up inside that fluid, obviously the piston starts to move through at a faster rate. So you get a softer shock over time. So on longer rides or on harder rides, you'll start to feel changes in the way that your shocks behave. Not so much with a gas charged shock or a nitro shock like these, because the hydraulic fluid and the gas charge is kept separately. It's separated by what's called an internal floating piston, which basically just stops that cavitation. It stops the foaming up of your hydraulic fluid. It keeps the viscosity of that fluid much more consistent. And of course, you've got extra damping control because the actual bladder of gas itself is compressible too. So as the oil pushes up against that, you get that extra layer of cushioning. And again, it's another point of control in terms of how hard or soft your shocks are. So there you go. That's the fundamentals of the differences between an emulsion shock and a nitro shock, these ones being nitro shocks. So we should get a really nice performing shock here from Hagen, and I'm really excited to see how they turn out on the bike. But the good thing about Hagen, again, is when you call them, you describe how you like to ride, what the typical kind of setup will be, whether you ride pillion, how much you weigh, what kind of luggage you take, and then they'll set up all your spring rates and everything like that for you. So you know that you're getting a degree of customization with these shocks that should be appropriate for the type of riding that you do, which is another bonus. So these are dialed in for me, and the fact that I'll probably be taking a pillion on a lot of these rides. It looks like they've put a lot of preload on these springs. This is how they came out the box, so I'm curious to know how they've set them up, but of course it's very easy using the tools provided to make those adjustments. So we'll see. Anyway, talking of suspension, on the front side of things, on the forks, we're just going to change the springs there. So the entire forks have been rebuilt. They've been stripped, so all the seals and all that have been replaced. The springs themselves, when I took them out, looked in pretty good condition, but I think they're quite old. They've probably been in the bike since it was built, which was 42 years ago. And over time, springs do tend to lose their elasticity a little bit as well. So we're going to get some new progressive Hyper Pro springs inside these forks. It would just give us, again, a little bit more of a progressive stroke on the forks there. The idea of progressive springs is that they're a little bit softer in the initial part of the stroke, and then they kind of tighten up. A lot of people don't like them because you can get more consistency out of a linear spring, and they're much easier to kind of figure out things like spring rates. We'll try it and we'll see. You know, if I need to go to a more linear spring, we can do that. But honestly, I'm not pushing this bike too hard. And I think from the reviews I've read, these are one of the better options on the market today. So let's put them in and we'll find out. I've talked a little bit about the changes I'm making to the top yoke. So again, the toaster tan top yoke is going to go on there just to try to add a little bit more rigidity to the top of the forks. The other thing that is going to change on this bike is the choice of tyres. So when I got this bike, it was running Michelin Pilot Active tyres, which I don't actually think are available anymore. I think Michelin now create a tyre called the Road 5 or the Classic Road 5, something like that. Anyway, so that was the obvious choice. That was the one actually I picked out first. Thought, you know, it looks nice. It's very similar to the tried and true Pilot Actives, so why not get that? And then I decided to do something completely different. So there is also a tyre that has got quite a lot of good sentiment behind it from Continental called the Classic Attack. Now, the downside of this tyre is it looks quite modern. It's got this kind of black chili design in terms of the tread patterns. If you care about keeping your looks classic, it might be better to steer towards something like the Michelin offering. But the really interesting thing about this tyre is Continental say that they have created a proper radial belt design that is suitable for bikes that were designed with that ply bias in mind, but you get all the benefits of a much more modern design. So this is a radial belt that runs at 0 degrees. So basically the belt is pointing in the direction of travel. Should give you much lower rolling resistance, better warm-up times, all that kind of stuff. And of course, they talk about the compound a lot in this black chili design with a micro texture on the outer surface of the tyre, which is again supposed to just give you a little bit more grip. We'll try them out, and I'm hoping for a little bit of improved handling there. So that's the tyres. We've talked a little bit about the braking system in other videos, but just as a reminder, everything's getting overhauled on the brakes. This bike has the twin Brembo calipers. We're going to change the discs to EBC floating discs. They're called the Pro Lights. And then we're going to strip out everything inside those calipers. New pistons, new seals, new pads, the works. I think we can certainly go some way to improving the stopping power of this bike just through some general kind of maintenance. So that's happening. What else can I talk about in terms of performance stuff? I think that's probably about it. I mean, obviously, like things like the carburetors have all been rebuilt as well. When they were taken apart, we found some of the diaphragms had holes in them and things like that. So that almost certainly wasn't helping out at all. So that's all been done. And the rest of it is really just kind of aesthetic stuff and stuff to improve the look and feel of the bike. The wheels themselves are going to be powder coated black. And I know that's not going to be for everyone, but I've seen a few examples of these bikes with black wheels and I think they look fantastic. The fact that this bike is completely blacked out in terms of the paint scheme. So on the fairing, on the petrol tank, on the rear cowl, everything's done in this beautiful glossy piano black with the double gold pinstripe. So I think it just kind of leans into that kind of blacked out feel. We've obviously got the stainless steel exhaust system, the stainless steel suspension on the back. So little kind of elements of stainless, but mainly kind of blacked out in terms of the paintwork. I think it's going to be a sweet combination, but we'll see. We'll have to see. And that's probably about it. The thing I'm waiting for at the moment is a lot of stuff to come back from Cerakoting. One of the other changes that I'm going to make on this bike is I'm swapping out the square valve covers for a set of what's known as the Peanuts. These are the older type of design that you would have found typically on bikes like the R100CS. Now, my reason for doing this is that the R100CS is supposed to be a hark back to the R100S. I think in an ideal world, this bike should have had the older design of valve covers just because they're more in line with the bike that it's supposed to celebrate. So I'm going to sort this out. But the small difference I'm going to make is they will be Cerakoted black. And what I'm going to do is just sand back some of those fins. The same treatment that I'm going to apply to the timing chest on the front of the bike. In terms of things like the dash, so you might have seen my video where I rebuilt the dash, took out the old glass, mainly because the aluminium surrounds that were holding that glass in place had very badly corroded. They'd come apart. And although I didn't test it, I had my money on the fact that these were probably pretty leaky, so I didn't fancy taking these out in the rain in their current state. So they've got new Perspex glass there on the front of the dash, which should make them a lot more watertight, something I have tested. But also, one of the things that I really wanted to do was try to find a way to refresh the font on the dash housing, which had faded over time. Now, hilariously, I did try to order a new sticker from Motor Bins here in the UK, and they accidentally sent me the wrong one, which not only was for an older dash, but also see if you can spot the typo here in the brake failure part of the dash. Yeah, so so that came off, and they did manage to send me free of charge a replacement, which is the correct year and thankfully has no typos on it, which looks absolutely brilliant. So I'm so happy that I managed to find a way to bring that font back up. I was kind of scratching my head trying to figure out how to do it. It would have been easy if the font was slightly raised. People do things with, like, little bits of potato and all that, put some white paint on it and just kind of push it over the top of the font. But it's not raised, it's actually slightly recessed on these newer dashes, so it is a bit of a challenge to try and do that. But I found a way and it looks absolutely brilliant. So the dash is absolutely ready to rock and roll. At the moment, I'm just trying to make sure that I've got all of the individual bits and pieces for the bike ready to go back together, so that when I'm in the garage, when I get stuck in, I'm not like having to order parts on a kind of sporadic basis. I want to have every single nut and bolt ready to go. I have found a company that does beautiful polished bolts, so all the bolts that are going to be visible on the bike will have beautiful polished heads, so we won't see any kind of rusty nuts and bolts anywhere on this machine. And I reckon, realistically, we should probably have this bike up and running for autumn time. Now, I was hoping for spring, but we're probably about 3 months behind schedule. I'm not in any rush to do it, so if it does get towards the end of the nice weather and I haven't managed to do it, I'll just keep it in the garage until early next year, and then we'll do some rides out when that happens. Other thing to mention that's coming down the line is that Trip Machine have sent me a couple of the Warrior 2 cases that I'm going to try out on this bike. It turns out from initial measurements that they should fit really well on the stock luggage racks that you get on this bike. Those are going to be replaced because the ones that are on my machine are completely rotten. They've got holes in them and all kinds of bad welds and stuff like that. So I'm going to replace those. And I think for most of my riding, I'll actually use the Trip Machine bags because they're a bit smaller. I think they look absolutely beautiful in their kind of black suede that these are going to come with. And then for bigger tours and things like that, I can stick on the Krausers. I might give those a bit of a service as well, just change the hinges and stuff like that, because I don't 100% trust them in their current state. They are pretty old, pretty creaky. They're probably not very waterproof, but I'll either try and fix those up or get a set of replacements, but they are quite expensive. They're coming in like £500-600 for a set of replica cases for the bike. But if you're going to do longer trips, they are obviously very, very useful to have. But I think the Trip Machine bags are going to look brilliant for everyday kind of bombing around London and doing kind of shorter rides out to Essex and places like that. So fun times. It's happening. It's all coming together. The flow of videos should start to pick up as well once the bike arrives back in the garage. The pace of the build should really start to gain momentum, so I'll be able to kind of get more content up on YouTube. So I do apologize for the lack of material about this bike for those who are following, but I think we're going to find ourselves in a better place in the next few kind of weeks ahead. So stay tuned for that. Thank you very much for watching this update. Until the next one, ride safe.